what we need to do is we need to keep everything in our neighborhood, everything, black. Black owned with black money.
Hollywood has always had a dark side, and for some stars, the spotlight came with a heavy price. Behind the fame, red carpets, and million-dollar roles, addiction quietly took hold. And while it's often swept under the rug, some of the industry's most talented black actors battled serious drug problems that nearly destroyed their careers or their lives. From the ones who spiraled to the ones who survived, here are 25 black actors who were huge junkies. 1. Richard Pryor.
Why don't you look me in the eye and say that?
I would if I could, but I can't. I'm blind.
Richard Pryor's story is one of those you can hardly believe unless you've read it twice. Known for being one of the greatest comedians of all time, he was also known for being wild off stage. Pryor wasn't just dabbling in drugs, he went headfirst into cocaine. He joked about it in his stand-up, but behind the laughter was a serious problem. At one point, Pryor even set himself on fire while freebasing cocaine. It was all over the news, and it became one of the darkest yet most shocking parts of his life. Instead of hiding it, Pryor turned it into material for his comedy routines, making people laugh at the same struggles that nearly killed him. His drug use spanned decades, and though he had periods of sobriety, the pull of cocaine was often too strong. Despite it, he still made classics like Stir Crazy, Harlem Nights, and Richard Pryor, Live on the Sunset Strip. The thing about Pryor was that he managed to take his lowest points and spin them into unforgettable performances. He admitted openly that cocaine had such a grip on him. He felt like it controlled every choice. Even his friends in Hollywood worried for him because Pryor never really hid what he was doing. Some of his closest peers said that the amount of drugs he used would have killed anyone else. Yet somehow, he kept going, until his health started paying the price. By the 1980s, the years of abuse began showing on him, but his comedic genius never went away. He is remembered as much for his unfiltered honesty about his drug use as he is for his groundbreaking comedy. 2. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston's voice could make anyone stop in their tracks. With hits like I Will Always Love You and I Want to Dance with Somebody, she was a superstar. But behind the voice was a long fight with drugs. Her troubles with cocaine, marijuana, and pills stretched across her career, and it became even more public after her marriage to Bobby Brown. Their relationship was filled with ups and downs, often fueled by substance abuse. Whitney's powerful image began to crumble in the public eye when interviews and performances showed the toll drugs had taken. She admitted in one famous interview, "Crack is whack," yet the rumors of crack cocaine use followed her for years. Even as her career slowed down, the focus shifted from her music to her personal life. Her struggles were no secret to her fans. The glossy image that made her America's sweetheart began to fade as tabloids showcased photos of her looking gaunt and exhausted. Rehab stints became part of her life story. In the 2000s, her once angelic voice had been damaged, and she struggled to make a comeback. Whitney's drug use was tied to stress, fame, and a marriage that only made things harder. Still, she delivered memorable performances and left behind an unmatched catalog of music. Her addiction might have shadowed her, but her songs and films like The Bodyguard and Waiting to Exhale still shine bright. 3. Samuel Leroy Jackson.
Hamburgers, the cornerstone of any nutritious breakfast.
Before Samuel Leroy Jackson became the cool, no-nonsense actor we know from Pulp Fiction, Django Unchained, and the Marvel movies, he was living a completely different life. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, Jackson was deep into heroin and cocaine. He was a stage actor in New York trying to make it big, but his drug use kept him down. Things hit rock bottom when his wife and daughter found him passed out on the floor after overdosing. That became a turning point. He entered rehab, and interestingly enough, his breakout role in Jungle Fever was playing a crack addict. It was a role he knew all too well, and critics praised his raw performance. Jackson has been open about how close he came to throwing his career away because of drugs. For Jackson, drugs were more than just a party thing. He admitted that heroin was so powerful, it almost took everything from him. He was caught in that cycle where you used to feel normal, and before you know it, you can't stop. He has said in interviews that without rehab, he wouldn't be here today. Looking back, it's wild to think that one of the highest-grossing actors in Hollywood once nearly lost it all because of addiction. His survival and ability to move forward gave him the chance to star in some of the most iconic films of all time. 4. Jamie Foxx.
There was another guy standing on the wall, green jacket. Nobody was talking to him. Guess who it was?
Who?
Jay-Z. Nobody knew. I said, what's up, man? Yeah, what's going on? It's just a great party. You know what I'm saying?
Jamie Foxx has the charm, the talent, and the humor that made him a household name. But before he reached the heights of Ray and his music career, he admitted to having his own battles with alcohol and drugs. Coming from a background in comedy and music, the party lifestyle was all around him, and he fell into it. Foxx has talked about how drugs and alcohol were part of the scene, and how easy it was to get caught up in it when you're young and surrounded by fame. He often adds humor when speaking about it, but the reality was that it could have easily derailed his career. Foxx has shared how there were nights when drinking and drugs nearly cost him opportunities. In the entertainment industry, being on your game is everything, and he risked it with every mistake. He said that when he began to take acting seriously, especially leading up to his role in R.A.Y., he knew he had to step away from that lifestyle. That choice gave him the focus he needed, and it paid off with an Academy Award. His music career also flourished with hits like Blame It. His honesty about his past makes his success even more impressive. 5. Eddie Griffin.
Y'all seen us at the beach splashing around, making it look like we doing some shit. Nigga feel some seaweed. Nigga something.
Eddie Griffin has always been known for his energy and sharp comedy, but he's also been very open about his drug use. Griffin admitted to heavy drug use earlier in his life, especially during the early years of his career. Fame came quickly, and so did the temptations that came with it. Drugs became a part of his lifestyle, and it took a toll on him personally and professionally. Even though he was battling addiction, he still managed to shine in projects like Undercover Brother and Malcolm and Eddie. Griffin's candidness about his drug use has often been part of his comedy. He doesn't sugarcoat the reality of what it did to him, but he always finds a way to make audiences laugh with those experiences. He has said that there were moments when he didn't think he would make it, but somehow he managed to keep pushing forward. His survival through those years says a lot about his resilience, and his fans love that he never pretends to be someone he's not. 6. Chris Tucker.
I need to borrow your car right quick.
What kind of shit is that? Most people want to borrow sugar, or even ketchup. You want to borrow my car? Hell no!
Chris Tucker rose to fame fast with Friday and then became an international star with Rush Hour. But behind the scenes, his career slowed down, and one of the reasons often talked about was his issues with drugs. While not as publicly documented as some of the others, Tucker's name often came up in discussions about addiction during his quiet years. There were reports that drugs played a role in him stepping away from Hollywood for a while, though Tucker himself has mostly kept details private. Still, many fans noticed the sudden change from him being one of the highest-paid actors to almost disappearing. His long absence left people wondering what really went on. At one point, Tucker was the highest-paid actor in Hollywood, earning massive paychecks for Rush Hour 2 and Rush Hour 3. And then suddenly, he was gone. When he returned with stand-up specials and appearances, he seemed to have left the old habits behind. While the full details of his drug use may never be public, it clearly played a part in his sudden career shift. 7. Ray Charles Ray. Charles wasn't just a music legend, he also made his way into acting. His story with addiction is one of the most famous. For decades, Charles battled heroin, even as he made groundbreaking music with hits like Hit the Road Jack, Georgia on My Mind, and What Did I Say? Heroin was a constant in his life. Arrests and rehab were part of his story, but somehow he kept making incredible music and performing at the highest level. His addiction was so strong that it took multiple arrests before he finally decided to get clean. When he did, Charles managed to stay sober for the rest of his life. Charles once said that heroin was like a companion, something he felt he couldn't live without. That dependency stayed with him for nearly 2 decades. The arrests forced him into rehab, and each time he came out stronger until he finally broke free. His music never slowed down, but behind the curtain, it was a struggle few knew the full details of. The fact that he overcame it after so long is just as remarkable as his music career itself. 8. DMX.
I don't know what Eminem is. I know he's a talented artist. We have a good relationship.
DMX was one of the most raw and passionate performers in hip-hop, with hits like Party Up and Ex-Gon, Give It To Ye. But his struggles with drugs were no secret. From a young age, DMX was introduced to crack cocaine, and it followed him throughout his entire life. Even as he transitioned into acting with movies like Belly and Romeo Must Die, his addiction kept pulling him back. He went in and out of rehab, had multiple arrests, and often spoke openly about his struggles. Fans loved him because he was always real, never hiding what he went through. DMX said he was tricked into smoking crack when he was just a kid, and it became a lifelong battle. That early experience created a cycle he could never fully escape. His career was filled with highs and lows, with music at the center, but addiction constantly lurked in the background. Even in his final years, DMX checked himself into rehab, proving that the fight never ended for him. 9. Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown's name is almost always tied to both his music and his chaotic lifestyle. With New Edition and as a solo artist, he gave hits like My Prerogative and Every Little Step. But his career and personal life were heavily marked by drugs. His relationship with Whitney Houston only added fuel to the fire, with the two often accused of dragging each other deeper into addiction. Cocaine, crack, marijuana, and alcohol were all part of Bobby's lifestyle, and his arrests and scandals were constantly in the headlines. Brown himself admitted that addiction took over his life. He was arrested multiple times, and his image went from being a talented singer to being the poster child for celebrity chaos. His reality TV appearances in the 2000s showed just how unstable things had become. Despite attempts to get sober, the years of drug use left a heavy mark. Still, Bobby's music remains popular, and his role in shaping R&B can't be denied, even if drugs were always part of his story. 10. Don Cheadle.
Are you Tony Stank?
Yes, this is Tony Stank. You're in the right place. Thank you for that.
Don Cheadle might surprise some people on this list because he's usually seen as one of the most serious and respected actors in Hollywood. Known for roles in Hotel Rwanda, Ocean's 11, and as War Machine in the Marvel franchise, Cheadle admitted in interviews that he had his own past struggles with drugs and alcohol. While not as extreme or public as others, he has spoken about how those substances were part of his younger years and how they affected him. Unlike some of his peers, he managed to keep things more private, focusing on his career and building a reputation as a versatile actor. Still, his openness about past struggles shows that even those who seem to have it all together had their own battles behind the scenes. Cheadle's career has only grown stronger, but his honesty about drugs and alcohol gives a glimpse into the challenges he faced before reaching the top. 11. Dave Chappelle.
In Africa. He went to Africa and he bought yellow cake.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure, bitch.
Dave Chappelle has always been known as one of the sharpest comedians to ever take the stage, but behind all the laughter, there were plenty of whispers about drugs following him. Hollywood is tough on comedians. Late nights, constant travel, and the pressure to always be funny can lead people down tricky paths. Dave became one of those names often attached to rumors of drug use, especially when he suddenly disappeared at the height of his fame. When he walked away from his hit show, Chappelle's Show, in 2005 and reportedly flew to South Africa, the gossip machine went into overdrive. People thought drugs played a part in why he left. There were constant headlines suggesting Chappelle was tangled in a drug habit, though he usually handled it in his typical style, by turning it into material and laughing at the accusations. Even though Dave never confirmed heavy drug use, the speculation stuck to him for years. The mix of fame, money, and Hollywood parties only made those rumors stronger. Behind the scenes, Chappelle was said to have battled the temptations that came with his fast rise. He admitted in interviews that he experimented in his younger years, and while not always specific, it wasn't hard for people to imagine drugs being in the picture. The pressure to carry an entire show, deal with network executives, and remain funny to millions of fans is enough to break anyone. And in his case, drugs were often painted as the escape. Even though he later returned stronger with Netflix specials, those early days of constant whispers about his alleged drug use remain part of his story. 12. Martin Lawrence.
Look, Janice, listen to me, okay? I know I lied about some things, but I can change.
Oh, I don't think so.
No, Janice, I promise. Don't do me like this.
Martin Lawrence is remembered for his wild comedy and blockbuster hits like Bad Boys and Big Mama's House, but he also had some very public struggles linked to drugs. His erratic behavior in the 1990s often became tabloid headlines. One of the most infamous moments came in 1996 when he was found wandering the streets of Los Angeles with a loaded gun, yelling at cars and people. Reports at the time linked the meltdown to drug use. He also collapsed while jogging later that same year, slipping into a coma that was reportedly caused by heat exhaustion combined with drugs in his system. That scary incident landed him in the hospital for several days. For fans, it was a shock to see the fun-loving comedian known for cracking jokes suddenly fighting for his life. Lawrence later admitted that during his rise to fame, he was partying too hard and surrounding himself with the wrong influences. Drugs became a way to cope with stress and fame, but they also fueled some of his most unpredictable behavior. The combination of cocaine and marijuana was frequently mentioned in reports about his struggles. While he continued to act and make people laugh, those episodes in the 1990s remain tied to his history with substance use. 13. Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes, famous for movies like Blade, White Men Can't Jump, and New Jack City, also found himself wrestling with drug-related issues during his career. Though he's often remembered for his legal troubles with taxes, there was a period when substance abuse was a major part of his story too. The action star, who often played tough, street-smart characters, had his own struggles off-screen. Reports circulated in the 1990s that Snipes was partying heavily, with drugs being a major part of his lifestyle. Cocaine and marijuana were commonly mentioned, and the Hollywood party scene kept pulling him deeper in. His tough guy image made it easy to hide what was really happening behind the scenes, but his personal life told another story. The influence of drugs allegedly put a strain on his career and relationships. While not every detail was public, people around him shared that his drug use was part of the chaos he faced. The irony is that Snipes starred in New Jack City, a film that centered heavily on the destructive power of crack cocaine, only for his real life to reflect some of the struggles the characters faced. Even though Snipes continued to land big roles, the shadow of drug use lingered throughout parts of his Hollywood journey. 14. Chris Rock.
That's right. The bigger the beard, the more leg room you get. They don't even have tickets. They just stamp your hand like you at a club.
Chris Rock is now one of the most respected names in comedy, but he hasn't hidden the fact that drugs were part of his younger years. Growing up in Brooklyn, Rock was surrounded by a tough environment where drugs were always around. When he broke into comedy, the lifestyle didn't get any easier. Clubs and late nights made drugs almost impossible to avoid. Rock has spoken about experimenting with cocaine in his early days, and it was something that easily could have derailed his career before it really began. Luckily, he realized quickly that he couldn't balance both comedy and heavy drug use. Still, those experiences gave him first-hand knowledge of addiction, and he later used that raw honesty in his stand-up material. While Rock may not have spiraled as far as some other comedians, his dabbling with drugs could have been disastrous. The young comic, trying to break into an industry dominated by big personalities, was walking a fine line. The fact that he survived those days says a lot, but his connection to drugs in the past remains a known part of his journey. 15. Charlie Murphy.
I was able to, just draw on some past experiences at that moment,
right,
which effectively horrified everybody in the room.
Did you get the job?
Yeah!
Charlie Murphy, Eddie Murphy's older brother, had a career that blended acting and comedy. His unforgettable skits on Chappelle's Show, especially the famous Rick James story, made him a fan favorite. But Charlie's personal life wasn't all laughs. He openly dealt with substance abuse, particularly cocaine, during different stages of his career. In interviews, Charlie admitted to using drugs when he was younger, especially during the 1980s when his brother Eddie's career exploded. Being part of that Hollywood scene meant parties, and drugs were everywhere. Cocaine, in particular, became a big part of Charlie's world. He described how easy it was to fall into addiction when fame and money seemed endless. Though he later moved past the worst of it, the struggles left their mark. Drugs drained his energy and focus at times, but he still managed to carve out his own space in comedy. His honesty about drug use made people connect with him because he didn't pretend to be perfect. Fans loved his raw storytelling, even when it came from some of his darker experiences with addiction. 16. Tracy Morgan. Tracy Morgan, star of 30 Rock and Saturday Night Live, has been very open about his battles with both alcohol and drugs. Before he became a household name, Morgan was caught in a cycle of substance abuse. Growing up in Brooklyn, he saw drugs all around him, and it wasn't long before he was pulled into that lifestyle himself. Crack cocaine was his drug of choice during his younger days. He has said in interviews that he was selling and using drugs before comedy became his escape. Even after he broke into show business, alcohol and cocaine still followed him. His unpredictable behavior on Saturday Night Live was sometimes linked to his partying habits, and his offstage life reflected those struggles too. His hectic life didn't make things easier. Between recording albums, acting in movies, and living under constant media attention, he leaned on drugs as both a coping mechanism and part of the party lifestyle. He was often described as someone who went from studio sessions straight to parties where the drugs flowed freely. Friends recalled that Tupac could light up a room with his energy, but behind the energy was often weed, alcohol, and at times, stronger substances. 17. Lawrence Fishburne. Lawrence Fishburne is a legendary actor with roles in classics like Boys in the Hood, The Matrix, and What's Love Got to Do with It. While Fishburne himself has not been as directly linked to heavy drug scandals as others, his family was not untouched by addiction. His daughter, Montana Fishburne, publicly spoke about substance struggles, and insiders often pointed to Lawrence himself facing personal battles connected to drugs and alcohol at different times. Fishburne came of age during the 1970s and 1980s, decades when Hollywood was overflowing with cocaine. Stories from the time suggested that he partied heavily in his younger years, experimenting with drugs along the way. Being in the entertainment industry at such a young age, he was only a teenager when he appeared in Apocalypse Now, meant he was exposed early to substances that many adults struggled with. 18. Bernie Mac. Bernie Mac was one of the original kings of comedy, but his rise to fame didn't come without battles. Long before he became a household name with The Bernie Mac Show and movies like Ocean's 11, Bernie was fighting addictions of his own. In his early days, while trying to break into stand-up, drugs were a constant temptation. The Chicago native admitted that he used cocaine during his younger years. The pressures of providing for his family while chasing comedy made the drug seem like an escape. Bernie later revealed that the lifestyle nearly cost him his health and his family. Even after he found success, drugs were a part of his story. Though he eventually put those days behind him, Bernie never shied away from acknowledging that he had gone down that road. Fans respected him more for being honest about his flaws, but his battle with drugs remains an important part of his life story. 19. Flavor Flav. Flavor Flav, the iconic hype man of Public Enemy and star of reality shows like Flavor of Love, had some of the most public battles with drugs out of anyone on this list. Crack cocaine ruled much of his life for years. Flav himself admitted that he spent over $2,000 a day at the peak of his addiction, a staggering amount that nearly destroyed him. His wild persona on television came from real-life chaos fueled by drugs. Arrests, rehab stints, and financial ruin all followed his long-term addiction. Flav often talked openly about how crack cocaine consumed him, admitting that he had been completely out of control for much of his career. Despite all the success he found in music and later reality TV, drugs almost cost him everything. He even admitted that during his years with Public Enemy, he was often high while performing. Fans loved his energy, but many didn't realize it was being fueled by heavy drug use. Flavor Flav's name became almost synonymous with addiction during the 1990s, and though he later worked to get clean, the years he lost to crack are unforgettable. 20. Coolio Coolio, best known for his hit song Gangsta's Paradise and appearances in films like Batman and Robin, lived much of his life in the grip of addiction. The rapper-turned-actor was arrested multiple times for drug possession, including crack cocaine and meth. His struggles were so frequent that they often overshadowed his music and acting career. Coolio admitted in interviews that drugs had been a part of his life since his teenage years. What started as experimenting eventually grew into a full-blown addiction. He described periods when he couldn't go a day without using. Arrests in airports, hotel busts, and run-ins with the police often linked back to his substance abuse. Even in his later years, when he was making TV appearances and performing on nostalgia tours, drugs continued to follow him. His untimely death in 2022 sparked renewed attention on how much addiction had played a role in his life. Fans loved him for his music and his larger-than-life personality, but his story was also marked by decades of drug use that he could never fully escape. 21. Tupac Shakur. Tupac Shakur was a lot of things at once: rapper, poet, actor, activist, and at times a magnet for controversy. What many people sometimes forget is that he was also an actor who appeared in some memorable films like Juice, Poetic Justice, and Above the Rim. Behind his brilliance and chaotic lifestyle, drugs were a constant presence. Tupac grew up surrounded by addiction. His mother, Afeni Shakur, had a well-documented struggle with crack cocaine, which deeply shaped Tupac's early life. That exposure to drugs at home carried into his own adulthood. He spoke openly about using marijuana heavily, and anyone who knew him said weed was pretty much always around. But marijuana wasn't the only thing. During his rise to fame, he admitted to dabbling in other substances, including cocaine. 22. Snoop Dogg.
It's about time, right?
Where did you meet? How did this all get started? You don't remember?
Snoop Dogg is the walking definition of a marijuana legend. It's nearly impossible to mention his name without thinking about weed. From the time he appeared on Dr. Dre's The Chronic album in the early 1990s, Snoop has been tied to cannabis. His long braids, laid-back style, and love of marijuana made him as much of a cultural icon as his music and acting. Snoop's drug use wasn't just about marijuana, though weed was the centerpiece. He has admitted to trying cocaine during his early days, and stories often mention him being caught up in the chaos of the Los Angeles gangsta rap lifestyle. That meant more than just smoking. There were parties filled with every drug imaginable. Still, Snoop somehow made weed his brand and leaned into it more than anything else. He has said in interviews that at his peak, he smoked as many as 80 blunts a day. That sounds unbelievable, but coming from Snoop, people just nodded and believed it. Even while filming movies like Baby Boy, Soul Plane, and Training Day, it wasn't unusual for him to light up before or after a scene. Directors and producers often joked that the smell of weed announced his arrival before he even walked into the room. 23. Andre Royo.
Oh, no.
I'm replacing Vernon.
No one can replace Vernon.
Yeah, you're right about that. But there is work to do.
Andre Royo, best known for playing Bubbles on The Wire, had a role that mirrored a lot of his own real-life struggles. The character of Bubbles was a heroin addict, and Royo played it so convincingly that people often wondered if he was actually using it in real life. The truth is, he did have his own battles with substances before and during his acting career. Royo admitted that playing Bubbles was tough because he knew firsthand what addiction looked like. He had experimented with drugs heavily in the past, including cocaine and heroin. The lifestyle of a struggling actor, bouncing between auditions and side jobs, didn't exactly keep him away from temptations. Instead, it pushed him deeper into them. His realism on screen was partly because he could pull from personal memories. He once described being offered drugs by strangers who thought he was actually homeless and addicted. That was how convincing both the role and his familiarity with that world were. For him, art and life overlapped in uncomfortable ways. Even though he later pulled away from the heavier substances, those years of experimentation left their mark. Royo has talked openly about how close he came to ruining his career before it really began. Drugs were both part of his downfall and strangely part of his success, since his experience helped him bring authenticity to one of television's most memorable characters. 24. Orlando Brown.
First you tell me Andrea's gonna kiss me, then you make me your boyfriend so I can't kiss her. Man, this is one big psychic ripoff.
Orlando Brown is one of those child stars whose off-screen troubles almost overshadowed his early success. He made his name playing Eddie Thomas on That's So Raven, and fans loved his goofy, funny energy. But as he grew older, his life spun into a very public spiral of drug use and bizarre behavior. His addiction issues became tabloid material in the late 2000s and 2010s. Arrests for drug possession kept popping up, and his erratic interviews made it clear that he was struggling. Cocaine and meth were often mentioned in reports about his arrests, and the transformation from a Disney Channel star to someone caught in the grip of addiction shocked a lot of people. Brown admitted in interviews that drugs had taken over his life, fueling his unpredictable behavior. Clips of him rambling wildly online became viral content, but behind the humor was someone clearly battling serious addiction. He bounced in and out of rehab facilities, but the pattern of relapse was constant. For someone who once had a bright acting career, his descent into addiction was a stark reminder of how quickly Hollywood can chew up young stars. Drugs became both his escape and his downfall, dragging him into one headline after another. 25. Lamont Bentley. Lamont Bentley is remembered for his role as Hakeem Campbell on the hit show Moshe. He was a talented actor who brought charm and humor to the screen, but off camera, he was dealing with his own substance problems. Bentley's struggle with drugs became more apparent in the years after Moshe ended, when his career slowed down. Friends and insiders revealed that Bentley used both drugs and alcohol heavily, often as a way to cope with the pressures of Hollywood and the frustration of not landing bigger roles after the show. Marijuana, cocaine, and ecstasy were all part of his lifestyle, especially during nights out. Unfortunately, his battles with substances played a part in his tragic death. In 2005, he was involved in a fatal car accident in Los Angeles after a night of heavy drinking and drug use. Witnesses and reports stated that he had been speeding and lost control of his car, leading to the crash that ended his life at just 31 years old.